Blood Ties. Chapter 1. The Strange Call. Jack Donovan had always believed his family was like any other. They had their ups and downs, occasional arguments, but nothing out of the ordinary. He lived in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business, and secrets were hard to keep. That's what made the phone call he received late one night all the more unsettling. It was a Thursday just after midnight. Jack was jolted awake by the sharp ring of his phone. Groggy and disoriented, he reached over to the nightstand and answered without checking the caller ID. "Hello." His voice was thick with sleep. At first there was only silence on the other end, then a faint rustling sound, like someone trying to find their voice. Jack sat up, now fully awake, his heart beginning to race. "Who is this?" he asked, a tinge of annoyance creeping into his tone. Finally a voice came through, low and tremulous. "Jack, you don't know me, but I know about you. About your family." Jack frowned, trying to place the voice, but it was unfamiliar. "What the hell is this? Some kind of prank?" "No," the voice responded quickly. "It's not a prank. Your family isn't what you think. They've been lying to you your whole life." The words sent a chill down Jack's spine. He had no patience for games, especially not in the middle of the night. "Listen, I don't know who you are, but I'm hanging up now." "Wait," the voice pleaded. "If you care about your life, you'll listen to me. You're in danger, Jack. They're not who they say they are." Jack's hand froze on the phone. There was something in the caller's tone, something desperate and urgent, that made him hesitate. "What do you mean, they're not who they say they are?" Jack asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Your parents, they're not your real parents. They're not even related to you by blood. There's something you need to know, something they've kept hidden from you all these years. But I can't explain it all over the phone. Meet me tomorrow night at the old lighthouse and I'll tell you everything." Before Jack could respond, the line went dead. He stared at the phone in his hand, the dial tone echoing in his ear. What the hell just happened? He wanted to dismiss it as a prank, but the unease gnawing at his gut wouldn't let him. He knew he should call his parents or maybe even the police, but something held him back. Instead, he found himself thinking about the old lighthouse on the outskirts of town, a place he hadn't visited since he was a teenager. Jack shook his head, trying to clear the fog of confusion. It was just a prank, he told himself, nothing more. But even as he tried to convince himself, he knew deep down that he wouldn't be able to rest until he got some answers. And so, against his better judgment, Jack decided he would go to the lighthouse the next night. He had to know if there was any truth to the stranger's claims, even if it meant uncovering something he wasn't prepared to face. Chapter 2. The Lighthouse. The following day crawled by at a maddeningly slow pace. Jack found himself constantly glancing at the clock, his thoughts consumed by the cryptic phone call from the night before. He debated telling someone, maybe his best friend, Mike, or even his sister, Sarah, but something stopped him. It was as if the weight of the secret was already too much to share. Besides, what would he even say? By the time the sun began to set, Jack's anxiety had morphed into a restless determination. He grabbed his jacket and headed out, making his way to the edge of town. The lighthouse was a relic from a bygone era, long since abandoned, standing alone on a rocky cliff overlooking the sea. It was a place the locals avoided, haunted by rumors and old ghost stories. As Jack approached the lighthouse, the wind picked up, howling through the cracks in the worn stone. The structure loomed above him, its shadow stretching across the ground like a specter. He hesitated for a moment, wondering if he was making a mistake. But the pull of the unknown was too strong, and before he knew it, he was pushing open the creaky iron gate that led to the lighthouse entrance. The door was slightly ajar, and Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he stepped inside. The interior was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the moon through broken windows. Dust and cobwebs covered every surface, and the air was thick with the smell of salt and decay. "Hello?" Jack called out, his voice echoing through the empty space. There was no response, just the sound of the wind whistling through the cracks in the walls. Jack took a few more steps, peering into the shadows, when suddenly he heard movement behind him. He spun around, his breath catching in his throat. A figure emerged from the darkness, cloaked in shadow. Jack's pulse quickened as the figure stepped into the pale light, revealing a man in his late 50s with graying hair and deep lines etched into his face. His eyes were sharp, filled with an intensity that made Jack uneasy. "You came," the man said, his voice the same as the one on the phone. "I wasn't sure if you would." Jack swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly dry. Who are you? And what the hell is going on? The man took a step closer, his expression serious. My name is Thomas. I knew your real parents, Jack. They were good people, but they made a lot of enemies. When they died, you were just a baby. You were placed with your current family for protection, but they're not who you think they are. Jack stared at Thomas, trying to process what he was hearing. What do you mean, enemies? Why would anyone want to hurt my parents? Thomas sighed, a look of sadness passing over his face. Your parents were involved in something dangerous, something that got them killed. And now, those same people are coming after you. They've been watching you, waiting for the right moment. That's why I had to warn you. Jack's mind was reeling. It all sounded too far-fetched, like something out of a bad movie. This is crazy, he muttered, shaking his head. I don't believe you. You don't have to believe me, Thomas said quietly. But the truth is coming for you, whether you're ready or not. Jack opened his mouth to respond, but before he could say anything, the sound of footsteps echoed from the entrance of the lighthouse. Both men turned, eyes widening as another figure stepped into the dim light, a figure Jack recognized immediately. Dad. Jack's voice trembled with confusion and fear. His father, the man who had raised him, stood in the doorway, his face hard as stone. Jack, step away from him, he ordered, his voice low and commanding. Jack looked between his father and Thomas, his mind spinning. What's going on? What aren't you telling me? But before anyone could answer, the air was shattered by the deafening crack of a gunshot. Chapter 3. The Revelation. The sound of the gunshot reverberated through the lighthouse, its echo fading into the cold night air. Jack froze, his heart thudding in his chest as he tried to make sense of what just happened. For a moment, everything was silent, the world suspended in a terrifying stillness. Then he saw it. Thomas staggered backward, clutching his side, his face contorted in pain. Blood seeped through his fingers, staining his shirt a deep crimson. No! Jack cried out, rushing toward the older man, but his father was faster. Stay back, Jack. His father's voice was sharp, his outstretched arm blocking Jack's path. Jack recoiled, staring at his father in disbelief. What are you doing? Why did you shoot him? His father's face was a mask of grim determination. I warned you not to come here, Jack. This man is dangerous. He's been filling your head with lies. Thomas groaned, sinking to his knees, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Don't listen to him, Jack, he wheezed. You need to know the truth, about your parents, about who you really are. Jack's mind was a whirlwind of confusion and fear. Nothing made sense anymore. He had come here looking for answers, but all he had found were more questions, and a betrayal that cut him to the core. Dad, please, Jack pleaded, his voice shaking. Just tell me the truth. What's really going on? What aren't you telling me? His father's eyes softened for a moment, but the hard edge quickly returned. The truth is, I've been trying to protect you, Jack. Everything I've done, it's been for your safety. But you never should have come here. You don't understand what you're getting yourself into. Jack's hands trembled as he took a step back, his eyes darting between his father and the injured man on the ground. Why should I believe you? You just shot him. Because he's a liar, his father snapped. He's trying to manipulate you to turn you against us. You don't know what he's capable of. Thomas coughed, spitting blood onto the dusty floor. I have no reason to lie, Jack, he rasped. Your parents, they were part of something bigger, something dangerous. They tried to get out, to protect you, but it cost them their lives. Your father here, he was part of it too. But he stayed. He stayed and took you in to keep you quiet. Jack's breath hitched as he turned to his father, his eyes wide with horror. Is that true? Were you part of it? His father's jaw tightened, and for a moment he said nothing. The silence was deafening, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Finally, his father sighed, his shoulders slumping as if a great weight had been placed on them. Yes, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I was involved, but I left it all behind when I took you in. I wanted to give you a normal life, to keep you safe from the people who killed your real parents. But Thomas, he's been trying to drag you back into it ever since he found out who you were. Jack felt as if the ground had been pulled out from under him. Everything he thought he knew was unraveling before his eyes, leaving him lost in a sea of doubt and fear. He looked down at Thomas, who was struggling to stay conscious, then back at his father, whose face was etched with guilt and desperation. What am I supposed to believe? Jack whispered, his voice breaking. Who am I supposed to trust? Thomas reached out a trembling hand, his eyes locking onto Jack's with a fierce intensity. "Trust yourself, Jack," he urged. "Find the truth. Don't let them bury it." Jack hesitated, his mind a jumble of conflicting thoughts. But before he could make a decision, the sound of more footsteps echoed from the lighthouse entrance. Jack's heart sank as several men in dark suits appeared, their expressions cold and menacing. "Dad," Jack whispered, his voice filled with dread. "Who are they?" His father's face went pale. "They're here for you, Jack. We need to get out of here, now." But it was too late. The men were already closing in, their intentions clear. Jack's father grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the back exit. But Jack's feet felt rooted to the ground, his mind still reeling from the revelations and the danger closing in around him. As the men advanced, Jack realized he was out of time. Whatever choice he made, there would be no turning back. Chapter 4. The Escape. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as his father tugged on his arm, trying to drag him toward the back exit of the lighthouse. The men in dark suits were getting closer, their faces hard and emotionless. The air was thick with tension, and Jack knew that whatever was about to happen, it would change his life forever. "Jack, move!" his father barked, snapping Jack out of his daze. Without thinking, Jack followed his father, stumbling over the uneven floor as they made their way to a narrow staircase at the back of the lighthouse. The staircase spiraled upward, winding around the tower. Jack hesitated, glancing back at Thomas, who was still bleeding on the ground, but his father's grip tightened, pulling him along. "There's no time, Jack. We have to go," his father insisted, urgency in his voice. Reluctantly, Jack tore his gaze away and followed his father up the stairs. The sound of the men's footsteps echoed behind them, getting closer with each passing second. Jack's breath came in ragged gasps as they climbed higher and higher, the narrow staircase feeling more claustrophobic with each step. When they reached the top, they burst through a rusted door that led to the lighthouse's observation deck. The wind was fierce up here, whipping around them as they stepped out into the open air. The deck was small, with a waist-high railing that overlooked the jagged rocks and churning sea far below. His father immediately started looking for another way out, his eyes scanning the area for anything that could help them escape. Jack, on the other hand, was struggling to process everything that had happened. The revelations about his parents, his father's involvement in whatever dark secret they had been part of, and the sudden violent danger they now faced, it was all too much. "What now?" Jack shouted over the howling wind. "There." His father pointed to a narrow ladder on the side of the lighthouse, leading down to a ledge below. It wasn't much, but it was their only option. "Are you kidding me?" Jack's eyes widened at the sight of the flimsy ladder swaying in the wind. "Do you have a better idea?" His father shot back, already making his way toward it. Jack swallowed his fear and followed, his hands gripping the cold metal rungs as he started to descend. The ladder creaked under their weight and the drop below was dizzying. Jack kept his eyes focused on the ladder, trying not to think about what would happen if he slipped. As they climbed down, Jack heard the door to the observation deck slam open above them. He glanced up and saw the men in suits standing there, their cold eyes locked onto him and his father. One of the men pulled out a gun and Jack's blood ran cold. "Hurry, Jack," his father urged, but it was too late. A shot rang out and the bullet whizzed past Jack's ear, hitting the metal ladder with a loud ping. Jack's grip tightened, his knuckles white as he descended faster, fear propelling him downward. Another shot, and this time the bullet grazed his arm. Jack yelped in pain, almost losing his grip. He could feel the blood seeping through his sleeve, the pain sharp and burning. "Keep going," his father shouted from below. Jack gritted his teeth and pushed through the pain, focusing on each rung of the ladder as they made their way down. Finally, they reached the ledge and his father quickly helped him off the ladder. "Are you okay?" his father asked, his eyes scanning Jack for injuries. "I'm fine," Jack lied, the adrenaline masking the worst of the pain. His father nodded, then pointed to a narrow path along the cliffside. "We have to keep moving. They won't stop until they get what they want." Jack didn't need to ask what that was. It was clear now that whatever secret his parents had been involved in, it was something worth killing for. They started along the path, the wind howling in their ears as they made their way along the treacherous cliff. The men in suits were still above them, but the narrow path made it difficult for them to follow. Jack's heart raced as they navigated the rocky terrain, each step taking them farther from the lighthouse and closer to whatever lay ahead. As they rounded a bend, Jack's father suddenly stopped, pulling Jack into a small alcove in the rock. They crouched there, catching their breath, the sound of the ocean crashing below them. "We need to find somewhere to lay low," his father said, his voice low and urgent. "Somewhere they won't find us." Jack nodded, though his mind was still reeling. He had more questions than answers, and the one person who could have shed some light on everything, Thomas, was now bleeding out in a lighthouse they had just escaped from. "Dad," Jack began, his voice trembling. "What did they want with me? Why are they after us?" His father's eyes met his, filled with a mix of guilt and determination. "Because, Jack, you're the key to something they've been searching for a long time. And they won't stop until they have it, or until we're dead." The weight of his father's words sank in, chilling Jack to the bone. Whatever secrets his family had kept, they were far darker and more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. And now, those secrets were hunting him down, relentless and unforgiving. The only question that remained was how long they could keep running. Chapter 5. The Safe House. Jack's father led him through the winding, narrow path along the cliffside until they reached a dense thicket of trees. The wind died down as they moved deeper into the forest, the sounds of the ocean fading behind them. Jack's arm throbbed from where the bullet had grazed him, but he forced himself to push through the pain. There was no time to dwell on it, they had to keep moving. After what felt like hours, they finally emerged from the trees into a small clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a dilapidated cabin, its wooden walls weathered and gray from years of exposure to the elements. It looked like it hadn't been occupied in decades, but Jack's father headed toward it with purpose. "This is it," his father said, pulling out a set of old keys from his pocket. "We'll be safe here at least for a while." Jack followed him inside, his nerves on edge. The interior of the cabin was just as run down as the outside. Dust coated every surface, and the air was thick with the musty scent of decay. A single cot stood in the corner, along with a small table and a wood stove. It was far from comfortable, but it was shelter, and right now that was all they needed. His father quickly went to work, securing the door and checking the windows. Jack sank onto the cot, his mind still racing with everything that had happened. The events of the last 24 hours had turned his world upside down, and he still couldn't fully grasp the magnitude of it all. As his father finished his checks, he turned to Jack with a grim expression. "We need to talk, Jack. I owe you the truth." Jack looked up at him, a mix of anger and desperation in his eyes. "Yeah, you do. What the hell is going on? What did Thomas mean when he said I was the key to something?" His father sighed, rubbing a hand over his face as if trying to find the right words. "It all started before you were born, Jack. Your real parents, they were part of an organization, one that operated in the shadows, dealing with things most people couldn't even imagine. It was dangerous work, but they believed in what they were doing. They believed they were protecting something important." "What kind of organization?" Jack asked, his voice low. His father hesitated before answering. "They called themselves the Covenant. They were a group of individuals who had access to knowledge, ancient and powerful, that most of the world had forgotten. Your parents were researchers trying to uncover secrets buried in history, secrets that could change the world." Jack's mind spun, the pieces of the puzzle slowly coming together. "And these people, the ones after us, they want that knowledge?" "They want more than that," his father replied. "They want control. Your parents were killed because they refused to give up what they found. And when they realized they were in danger, they hid the most important piece, the key that would unlock everything." Jack's heart skipped a beat. "And you think I have it? That I'm the key?" His father nodded, his expression grave. "Yes. Before they died, your parents managed to encode the information into something that only you would have access to. They knew you'd be targeted if anyone found out, so they placed you with us, hoping we could protect you." Jack felt like the ground was shifting beneath him. "But I don't know anything about this. I've lived a normal life. How could I be the key to something like this?" "That's exactly why it worked," his father said. "You were never supposed to know. But now, after all these years, the people who want that knowledge have caught up to us. They know who you are, and they won't stop until they get what they want." Jack's thoughts raced as he tried to comprehend the weight of his father's words. His entire life had been a lie, carefully constructed to keep him safe from a threat he hadn't even known existed. And now that threat was closing in, relentless and unstoppable. "What do we do now?" Jack asked, his voice barely above a whisper. His father's eyes hardened with resolve. "We fight. We find out exactly what your parents left behind, and we make sure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands. But first we need to get you somewhere safe. Somewhere they won't find you." Jack nodded, though fear gnawed at his insides. "And if they do find us?" His father placed a hand on Jack's shoulder, his grip firm and reassuring. "Then we make sure they regret it." As the night wore on, Jack and his father made plans, mapping out their next steps. The weight of the truth hung heavy in the air, but for the first time since this nightmare began, Jack felt a flicker of hope. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let the people who destroyed his family win. Whatever it took, he would uncover the secrets of the covenant and protect the legacy his parents had died for. And he would do it with the man who had raised him, the man who had kept him safe all these years. But even as he steeled himself for the battle ahead, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. Chapter 6. The Hidden Truth. The days that followed were a blur of movement and tension. Jack and his father stayed in the cabin for as long as they dared, gathering supplies and formulating their plan. But they both knew it wouldn't be safe for long. The men who were after them, who were after Jack, wouldn't rest until they found him. The small, dusty cabin might have bought them some time, but it wouldn't be enough. On the third night, just before dawn, they left the cabin behind and made their way to a remote location Jack's father had mentioned only in passing. A safe house hidden deep in the woods, where they could regroup and figure out their next move. Jack had never been there before, but his father assured him it was secure, a place known only to a select few. They drove through the night, the road winding through dense forests and over rugged terrain. Jack's mind raced with questions, but he forced himself to stay focused. There would be time for answers later. Right now they needed to stay alive. When they finally arrived, the safe house was nothing like Jack had imagined. It wasn't some high-tech bunker or fortified hideout. It was a modest log cabin, nestled in a secluded valley, almost invisible from the road. It looked unassuming, ordinary, but Jack knew better than to judge it by appearances. His father had chosen this place for a reason. Once inside, they wasted no time. Jack's father immediately went to work, pulling out maps, documents, and a laptop from a hidden compartment in the floor. Jack watched as his father meticulously organized everything, his mind clearly running a mile a minute. "Dad," Jack said after a while, "I need to know more. About the covenant, about what they're after. About me." His father paused, looking at Jack with a mix of concern and resolve. "You deserve to know everything, Jack. But once you know the truth, there's no going back. Are you sure you're ready for that?" Jack hesitated, the weight of his father's words pressing down on him. But he knew he couldn't keep running blind. He had to know what he was up against, what they were up against. "I'm ready," Jack said firmly, his eyes meeting his father's. His father nodded, then sat down at the table, motioning for Jack to join him. "Your parents were brilliant, Jack. They were historians, archaeologists, but more than that, they were explorers of the unknown. They dedicated their lives to uncovering ancient knowledge, things that had been lost or buried by time. But what they found, it was more than just history. It was power." Jack listened intently as his father continued. "They discovered a series of ancient texts, written in a language long forgotten. These texts spoke of a key, an object of immense power, something that could unlock secrets beyond comprehension. Your parents spent years searching for it, piecing together clues from across the world. And they found it." Jack's heart pounded in his chest. What was it? His father's expression darkened. "They never told me. They kept that part hidden even from those closest to them. But they knew it was dangerous. They knew there were others, people who would stop at nothing to get their hands on it. That's why they hid it, Jack. They hid it in a way that only you could ever find it." Jack's mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of the puzzle. "But how? I don't remember anything about this. How could they have hidden something in me without me knowing?" "That's the genius of it," his father replied. "They didn't hide it in you physically. They encoded it, embedded it in your memories, your experiences, things you wouldn't even think twice about. You've been carrying it with you your whole life, Jack, without even knowing it." Jack's breath caught in his throat. "But how do I find it? How do I unlock it?" His father reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, ornate key. "This is the first step," he said, placing it in Jack's hand. "This key was left with me by your parents with instructions to give it to you when the time was right. It's the only clue they left behind. Whatever it unlocks, it's the beginning of the trail they set for you." Jack stared at the key, its weight heavy in his palm. It was simple yet intricately designed, with strange symbols etched into the metal. It felt both familiar and foreign at the same time. "What does it open?" Jack asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't know," his father admitted, "but I believe it's connected to something in this safe house. Your parents mentioned this place before they died, said it was where you would find your answers." Jack looked around the cabin, his mind racing. If this was where the trail began, then he had to find whatever it was his parents had left for him. It was the only way to uncover the truth, and the only way to survive. "Let's find out," Jack said, determination in his voice. His father nodded, and together they began searching the safe house, their eyes scanning every corner, every crevice for something that would fit the key. The minutes ticked by, the tension mounting as they searched, until finally, in a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards, they found it. A small metal box, old and worn, with a lock that matched the key perfectly. Jack's hands trembled as he inserted the key into the lock. With a soft click, the box opened, revealing its contents. A single, ancient-looking journal, bound in leather and filled with pages of handwritten notes and symbols. "This is it," Jack whispered, his voice filled with awe and fear. His father looked over his shoulder, his expression unreadable. "Your parents left this for you, Jack. Whatever's in that journal, it's the truth they died for. It's the key to everything." Jack took a deep breath and opened the journal, the pages crackling as he turned them. The symbols were strange, the handwriting unfamiliar, but as he read, a chill ran down his spine. His parents had uncovered something far more dangerous than he had imagined, and now that danger was coming for him. But as Jack continued to read, he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to run anymore. He was going to fight, and he was going to finish what his parents had started, no matter what it took. Chapter 7. The Final Stand. As Jack delved deeper into the journal, the weight of the truth pressed down on him. The pages were filled with cryptic notes, symbols, and drawings that seemed to blend the ancient with the modern. His parents had been on the brink of a discovery that could change the course of history, something that tied together lost civilizations, forbidden knowledge, and a power that had been hidden for millennia. But with that knowledge came danger that had now fallen squarely on Jack's shoulders. His father sat across from him, watching as Jack's eyes scanned the pages, his face a mixture of concentration and fear. "What does it say?" his father asked, his voice low and tense. It's a map," Jack said slowly, tracing a line on the page with his finger. "Not a physical one, but a map of knowledge, of connections between ancient cultures that were never supposed to exist. My parents believed these connections led to something, a source of power or knowledge that could be used for great good or unimaginable evil." His father's eyes narrowed. "And they hid it? To keep it out of the wrong hands?" Jack nodded. "They encoded the location in these symbols and notes. But the key isn't just in this journal, it's in me, in my memories, just like you said. They must have taught me things as a child, things I didn't even realize were important, that would help me decode this." Jack's father reached over and placed a hand on his shoulder. "We'll figure it out together, Jack. Whatever your parents left behind, we'll unlock it. But we need to move quickly. Those men, they won't stop hunting us." Jack closed the journal, his resolve hardening. "Then we can't let them get to us first. We need to find this place, this source, before they do. If it's as powerful as my parents believed, we can't let it fall into the wrong hands." His father nodded, but before he could respond, a loud bang echoed from outside the cabin, followed by the sound of splintering wood. Jack's heart skipped a beat as they both sprang to their feet. "They've found us," his father said, his voice tight with urgency. "We need to go now." But as they moved toward the back exit, the door burst open and the men in suits stormed in, guns drawn. Jack's father shoved him behind the table, shielding him as bullets tore through the air. The sound was deafening, the smell of gunpowder filling the small cabin. "Jack, stay down," his father shouted, firing back at the men with a pistol he had pulled from his jacket. But they were outnumbered, and the men advanced quickly, their expressions cold and determined. Jack's mind raced, his eyes darting around the room for an escape. The journal clutched in his hand felt like a burning weight, the key to everything they had fought for. But as the men closed in, he realized there was only one way to protect it. "Dad, we have to get out of here," Jack yelled, but his father was already moving, leading him toward a small window at the back of the cabin. "Go, Jack. I'll cover you," his father shouted, but Jack hesitated, fear gripping his heart. "I'm not leaving you," Jack shouted back, but his father's face hardened. You have to, Jack. They want you, not me. You're the one who can stop this, who can finish what your parents started. Now go. Jack's chest tightened with emotion, but there was no time to argue. With one last look at his father, he turned and dove through the window, the glass shattering around him as he hit the ground outside. He rolled to his feet, the journal still clutched in his hand, and took off running. Behind him, he could hear the sounds of the gunfight continuing, the sharp cracks of gunfire mixing with shouts and the heavy thud of boots on the ground. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to get away to keep the journal safe. His father's words echoed in his mind. He was the key, the one who could stop this. But the thought of leaving his father behind tore at his heart. He reached the tree line and kept running, the darkness of the forest closing in around him. Branches scratched at his face and the cold air stung his lungs, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. The sound of pursuit was still behind him, the men relentless in their hunt. But then, just as he began to think he might outrun them, a figure stepped out from the shadows ahead, blocking his path. Jack skidded to a halt, his heart pounding as the figure raised a gun and pointed it directly at him. "Hand over the journal, Jack," the man said calmly, his eyes cold and calculating. "It's over." Jack's mind raced, trying to find a way out, but he was trapped. The men were closing in behind him, and there was nowhere left to run. But as the man stepped closer, a sudden burst of gunfire echoed through the trees, and the man staggered, clutching his chest as he fell to the ground. Jack turned to see his father emerging from the shadows, his face grim and determined. "Come on, Jack," his father shouted, but just as he took a step forward, another shot rang out, and Jack watched in horror as his father stumbled, blood spreading across his shirt. "No!" Jack screamed, rushing to his father's side as he collapsed to the ground. The men were still coming, but Jack didn't care. All he could see was his father lying there, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. "Dad, hold on," Jack pleaded, his voice breaking. "You're going to be okay. Just hold on." But his father shook his head, his eyes filled with pain and regret. "Jack, you have to go. Finish it. For your parents. For me." Tears streamed down Jack's face as he held his father's hand, the journal still clutched in his other hand. "I can't do it without you," he whispered, his heart breaking. "You can," his father whispered back, his voice weak but filled with love. "You're stronger than you know. Now go, before it's too late." Jack hesitated, his heart torn, but he knew his father was right. With one last anguished look, he stood up, the journal heavy in his hand, and took off running into the darkness. He didn't look back. As he disappeared into the night, the sounds of pursuit fading behind him, Jack knew that the battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. And now, with his father's sacrifice weighing on his soul, he would stop at nothing to finish what his parents had started. No matter the cost.